Every Pokemon game since the beginning of the series has consistently come with two things: a generic rodent Pokemon, a la Rattata, and a generic bird Pokemon, a la Pidgey. These creatures have turned out to be just as classic as the starters you receive at a game's opening, and even though these rats and birds have seen some major variations over the years, they remain a seemingly permanent fixture of any region's early game routes. In many ways, these can be considered training Pokemon that serve to get you acquainted with this world that you're just starting out in, but they may begin to peter out the farther you go. These Pokemon are easy to use and tons of fun, but are also mainstays of the first routes for a reason. Generic rats and birds don't usually cut it against the powerhouses waiting farther down the road, as they don't have the tools or stat lines to succeed in more serious play. But despite that unfortunate prescription, several of the generic birds have managed to soar high above their usual expectations, and stand out as genuinely desirable powerhouses in their respective games. Look at Talonflame in X and Y, Staraptor in Diamond and Pearl, and then Corviknight in Sword and Shield. Yeah, it would seem that things have really turned around for these birds as of late. They're doing great things. And these are excellent tidings for one of our generic groupings. But I fear that the same cannot be said for the rats. Generation after generation, early game rat Pokemon have been dealt terrible and awful hands that have prevented them from seeing success in virtually any capacity. Much like the Raticate tossed out by Blue halfway through the original run of games, these are an unfortunate lineage of Rodentia that the games never give a chance at seeing the true greatness they so clearly deserve. In most cases, these are Pokemon that are relegated to holding all of the most annoying HMs required throughout the games, being forced into smashing rocks and cutting down trees as their primary utility. But Zigzagoon is different. And so is Bunnelby to a certain extent, so shout out. But Zigzagoon is especially noteworthy as a Route 1 rat that defies all of the odds. It's pretty great early on, like most other Rattata types in their home games, but through a combination of some unique moves, a valuable ability, and even receiving a special event distribution, the Zigzagoon family is decent, perhaps powerful even, in almost every dimension of play. From the very beginning of a Gen 3 playthrough, Zigzagoon and its evolution Lanoon are going to be helpful teammates worthy of making your main six. But like a squirrel that you swerve to avoid on the road, the Pokemon will also come to your aid in your darkest hour. This is an extremely dependable family, and is one capable of learning 4 out of the 8 available HMs in Hoenn that you'll need to traverse every corner of the region, whether it's cutting down trees, smashing rocks, pushing boulders, or ferrying friends across the high seas. And this is especially perfect because there are an equal number of move slots. As you can see here, that math works out just right. And even just as an HM user that probably isn't seeing any major fights, Zigzagoon and Lanoon are still going out of their way to help the cause through their incredible ability pickup, and they will collect items off and on throughout a playthrough whenever they're in the main party. It's for those reasons that I would wager this is a Pokemon that anyone who's ever picked up a Gen 3 cartridge is at least somewhat familiar with. They can wield a good chunk of those pesky field moves, and occasionally will drop an extra trinket in your bag. It makes for easy but meaningful utility, and that alone already deserves praise. For a foundational Pokemon, an unsung hero who makes up the backbone of the Gen 3 adventure. But it's also only part of the story, merely a small component of the potential that this beast actually has to offer. No Zigzagoon, I'm sorry, for I fear they weren't familiar with your game. Where Zigzagoon truly distinguishes itself from the rest of the generic rat crowd is with its varied and valuable move pool. Just taking it to the end of the main story will reveal a veritable ace in the hole in Belly Drum, the final move it learns by leveling up. With the sacrifice of half of their max HP, the user quadruples its attack stat in a risky gamble to clear out anything standing in the way. And this strikes me as a beautiful, almost poetic final move for a Pokemon like this. For one, it's obviously quite strong. That part is kind of a given, with the whole 4 times attack thing. But I also think this move takes on a deeper meaning for Pokemon like Zigzagoon and Lanoon. Belly Drum is a move that revolves around being rewarded for making a sacrifice. And this is a Pokemon that often spends the entirety of games having to bear the burden of field moves. An MVP for sure, but an unappreciated job that's nowhere near as flashy or cool as the other big players on a team known for their battling prowess. This rodent, like all the many others, sacrifices a lot to always be there for us, always making sure that we get where we need to go. But at long last, with Belly Drum, their willingness to sacrifice has turned them into a sweeping champion. The fruits of this Lanoon's labor will ultimately be seen as it effortlessly 5-0s each of the Elite Four with the help of this powerful final move. And so I think it's a really subtle but powerful resolution to a possible conundrum that this Pokemon poses with the way that we play this game. And it's also one that let the family legitimately stand out in high-level play for the generation. While it does require a decent amount of support, Gen 3 Belly Drum Lanoon is a powerful threat that can easily run through a team. Even with a stat line that the naysayers might call mediocre, the damage boost afforded by Belly Drum makes it into something that has to be taken seriously, or it will inevitably snowball entirely out of control. It's an absolute force to be reckoned with. But no Pokemon sweeps on a stat boost alone. Every stat booster requires the proper attacks to facilitate the job. The Zigzagoon family comes standardly out of the box with a number of great options for this requirement. There's Shadow Ball, Hidden Power, Return even, as long as you're besties of course. But Zigzagoon's best option here, one that is nothing short of a blessing given to it by Gen 3, comes in its event-exclusive move Extreme Speed, a high-power priority attack that is the key to enabling the sweep. Belly Drum to maximize attack, and then Extreme Speed to facilitate an all-out assault that outpaces anything that could hope to take it down first. This combo made Lanoon a scourge of Gen 3 underused, and ultimately culminated in the Pokemon getting banned out of the tier in 2023 and becoming an overused mon proper, even if just by technicality. But hey, didn't you just say that's an event-exclusive move? That's not accessible. The event probably ended 20 years ago or something. Pokemon Showdown is not reflective of real life. And yes, normally I would agree with that line of thought, but Extreme Speed Zigzagoon falls in a weird sort of middle ground. Because while the event can be challenging to obtain, it is still completely untimed and can be accessed legitimately to this day as long as you have the right hardware. An Extreme Speed Zigzagoon egg is handed out in Pokemon Box, Gen 3's Pokemon storage system that plays out of the GameCube, after you deposit 100 Pokemon from a single cartridge. This aspect is honestly a pretty easy hurdle to clear. I decided a few days ago that I wanted to try and get the egg, and then after a handful of hours hurling Pokeballs at Mons on Route 101, I was able to obtain my future prize fighter. And this egg is one of 4 that you receive as rewards for depositing Pokemon into Box, with rewards coming at the game's start, 100 deposited, 500 deposited, and 1499 deposited. It makes for a very cool touch to an otherwise very logistical process. And all 4 Pokemon come with exclusive moves, so it's got a very worthwhile feeling for collectors. The eggs even have the distinction of being 1 per save, so if you restart a save or connect a different cartridge, you can grab as many as you want. So it's easy enough to reroll for stats and shininess too if you're trying to get that top percentage Zigzagoon. There's really just one small, tiny, insignificant issue. Pokemon Box is without a doubt one of the rarest and most expensive Pokemon games out there, and it regularly goes for prices in the range of $1,000 to $2,000. And this is largely a result of US copies of the game only being sold for a limited time exclusively at the New York City Pokemon Center. These combined factors make for extremely rare events on a very difficult to track down game. So while this specific Zigzagoon is technically very accessible in a vacuum, it is contextually ridiculous to get a hold of from scratch for North American collectors so much further down the line. But there are still some options for getting access to this fountain of Zigzagoons. I'm a bit of a sucker for the physical experience myself, so I went the way of getting a Japanese copy and then running it alongside a Japanese GameCube and copy of Ruby, which was fortunately significantly cheaper, even altogether, as the game's release was much less limited over there. The game is unfortunately region locked, so all that extra stuff was necessary, but fortunately Gen 3 GBA titles can trade across any region. And so after a much bulkier, but still pretty fun process, I got the egg safely in my usual North American copy of Emerald. I can't really recommend doing it this way, much less getting an American copy of Box, unless you were extremely into this kind of thing like I am. Fortunately, this specific issue and interaction has gotten a lot of attention from the community in order to make Box and its gift Pokemon more accessible. Like this video by AbsolBlog's Pokemon about making Box more usable is a really great resource, as well as this video by Papa Hefe that specifically focuses on a creative way to get the Extreme Speed Zigzagoon in top fighting form. All of that is to say though, that Zigzagoon was deemed worthy enough at the time to receive a game-changing special move on an event, and that event is still 100% accessible today. So it's kind of the best of both worlds, even if it is a bit clunky. But would you believe that the Extreme Speed Belly Drum combo is still not the full extent of what this incredible creature is capable of? Let's leave the world of high-level play and PvP for a quick trip to the battle frontier, where we'll examine another area where this unlikely champion finds even more unexpected success. The frontier is Emerald's post-game playground for interesting and varied challenges where you go up against the toughest NPCs the game can throw your way. There are straightforward and classic challenges, like the Battle Tower, that have you try to win as many 3v3 matches in a row as possible, but also really untraditional ones, like the Battle Pike, that incorporate dungeon crawling and stamina into the challenge. The commonality between all of them, though, is that you are aiming to go on long, continuous win streaks with teams that offer the consistency required to not have any issues over the long stretches of matches. This is something that bodes extremely poorly for the aforementioned Lanoon toolkit, as the sacrifice required for Belly Drum poses too much of a long-term risk to succeed here. But this is where Lanoon's other skills come into play, giving it the chance to demonstrate the utility it can bring to the table on top of the power it has as a reckless glass cannon sweeper. Lanoon boasts a number of valuable setup and disruption moves that allow it to act in a support role at the frontier. It can force switch outs with Roar, swap items with Trick, and paralyze with Thunder Wave. And this access really shines through when pitted up against the Frontier AI rather than other humans. Trainers at the Frontier won't switch out a Pokemon despite it getting completely locked down by Lanoon, and this allows your other team members lying in wait to move in and prepare for a beatdown. The combination of using Trick to give an enemy a choice item and locking them into one move, Thunder Wave for taking away speed and sometimes whole turns away with paralysis, and even Charm to lower the attack of wannabe counterattackers makes for an ironclad strategy that can completely negate almost any lead Pokemon. After setting up the lock, Lanoon swaps for a sweeper that sets up and then goes to town. It's another example of Lanoon being an absolute team player, but this time with a much flashier and stylish role over its usual job of using field moves. And I think it bears mentioning that this set has seen demonstrated success and is not just my own purely theoretical rantings. Battle Frontier Legend, WT set, designed and used that specific Lanoon set with Trick, Charm, Thunder Wave, and Roar as a support for two other sweepers to post a whopping 657 wins in a row at the level 50 Battle Tower, demonstrating not only the potential strength of the build, but also the consistency that it wields against the Battle AI in Emerald. There's powerful utility hiding in plain sight with this garden variety Pokemon. This power as a supporter can also be seen at the Battle Pyramid, where it is able to uniquely take advantage of the dungeon-like nature of the challenge with its item collecting ability, and farm important tools early on before getting swapped out on subsequent rounds. Any key team member that thrives with the Choice Band will be especially grateful for the work that Lanoon does for the squad, altogether demonstrating the potential it has across a myriad of roles, whether as a relatively simple sweeper, or as a multi-dimensional supporter passing layups to an eager team. And so all in all, I think Zigzagoon paints a beautiful picture of an underdog success story, as despite having an extremely similar stat line to other, less fortunate generic rodents, Gen 3 blessed it in many ways with an unusual base covering move pool that gives it just what it needs to get the tough jobs done. Whether you're just starting out, heading into the late game and beyond, or duking it out with other players, the Zigzagoon family will step up to the plate despite the many challenges it faces. It's an unsung hero of Gen 3, and it's worthy of being called the ultimate Route 1 rat in Pokemon, one that's always there for us when we need it the most. That's all I got for you, folks. Thanks a lot if you made it this far. Recently, I've been sort of fascinated with looking at individual Pokemon through a sort of character analysis lens. You know, something usually reserved for individuals. But with Pokemon, there's this weird sort of middle ground with how the games quantify them, and I wanted to try giving that type of look to an old favorite of mine. So hopefully you enjoyed it. Definitely let me know what you thought down below, what you want to see from me in the future. If you want to see more of this, your thoughts on Zigzagoon, or maybe other Pokemon rats, you name it. In the meantime, I've got to get back to Route 101 with Zigzagoon. Have a good one, folks, and I will see you all next time. Droomish out.